Hello, it's Claire again at Dying Your Way podcast, and I am really excited about the topic and the person that we are talking with today, who is just an expert, a real authority on the topic of trauma. And a lot of people that I work with are definitely going through sudden shift of their entire life from one identity to another, and their whole world is shifting underneath them. And I had read about a word that I'd never heard before called post-traumatic growth. And I did a little bit of research. I found the topic fascinating. And I happen to know Monica through another source, but she is a trauma specialist, an addiction specialist. And I'll let her talk more about what it is that she does, but her name is Moniquea Spiteri, and she is a somatic, pardon me, a somatic psychotherapist. She is the founder and president of Inveco Health, which combines social support, so great, with mental health services to regain wellness in a therapeutic environment, a therapeutic community environment. She believes in a holistic approach to mental health and well-being, which is very much aligned with the palliative care approach that you hear me talk about frequently on this podcast, and that she approaches mental health in that same way, I think is just very unique in what she does. And I'm just so honored to introduce Moniquea Spiteri to you. So here we go into gallery view. Hi, Monica. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So, yeah.
Thanks for being here. As I was giving the introduction, I really appreciated even more what it is that you do, because your approach is so integrative and it's so holistic in the work that you do with people. Now, I certainly am not any kind of mental health expert, but I know you are, and specifically work with people that are suffering trauma. So what in the introduction did I not cover? And if you could tell us before we start a little bit more about you and Inveco Health.
Yeah. So, Envico's my, you could say my side project. That's sort of my biggest passion and love. My other business, which is my private practice, is Somatic Synergy. And that's where I see face-to-face clients, dealing with a range of trauma issues. And Invico Health is, so far it's a bit of a labor of love, but we're gaining momentum to be able to establish a therapeutic community model, and so having a residential care centre where people can come and they can heal from their traumas. They can be supported by a range of practitioners. They can stay for up to 12 months if they need to, but we're sort of looking at 3 and 6 and sort of like that stage stepped model of care. And a range of body-based and body-oriented practitioners, trauma-informed yoga. And while people are in residence and healing from these traumas and basically just given the time and the space to heal with that complete wraparound holistic care, they can also get training and job opportunities. So, in the Whole Food Cafe, then they'll be able to get hospitality training. Working a therapeutic community model is that it's peer-led. So the people that are actually in residence in the community are also running the centre. So we're just sort of in some negotiations at the moment and looking to sort of really start cementing that model out there, because in Victoria, so I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and we've just gone through the Royal Commission into Mental Health Services. So there's been some big changes in the mental health sector at the moment. So there's a lot of government changes, a lot of policy direction that's being really going to be implemented. So we're sort of moving with those shifting sands, so to speak, at the moment. But yeah, I've been chipping away at that program and the development for many years. So yeah.
I'm curious about two things. The word somatic sounds like it has to do with sleep, and I'm probably misinterpreting that completely wrong. Tell me about somatic.
So somatic, somatic, comes from the Greek word soma, which means body of life. So, in other words, somatic psychotherapy is body psychotherapy. And so
Okay.
I work with the mind and the body completely. So there's the psyche, but a lot of our information goes 80% body to brain. So 80% bottom up approach. So we're working directly with the autonomic nervous system. We're helping people. Most people are stuck in a fight flight pattern. And
Yeah.
so when we work with people directly with the autonomic nervous system, these things that are often overwhelming, and you would see this with what you do, sometimes things just become really overwhelming for people and they can't cope and they get stuck either switched on or they're switched off. Yeah. So hyper states or hyper-O states. So those
So it
low.
has nothing to do with sleep.
No, nothing to do with sleep. But,
Okay.
well, unless they're in a complete freeze state and
Yeah.
they're not moving.
And then the other thing that I'm just curious about before we get started, because I'm just always in awe of the difference in the Australian medical system and the US medical system. So what kind of support and even monetary support do people pay for these services to get mental health services? Do they pay for that?
Yeah, I suppose so. It just depends on what stream you're in. So if you're in the public mental health sector, in the public mental health stream, then there are packages, for that if you go through the public system. And then there's also private health care for mental health services. For me, I'm also what's called an NDIS provider. So in Australia, we've got the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So I can see people through that. So the government insurance pays for those sessions. And there's also a fee for service. So people pay me directly. So, depending on what type of practitioner you want to go and see, if you want to go and see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, psychologists in Australia can fall under the Medicare system and they get 10 sessions not all of them are bulk billed. They do have to pay a small gap fee.
Yeah.
But psychology is very different to somatic psychotherapy. That's mainly cognitive talk therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. No, I mean, there's just usually a very large expense that people have to go to get any kind of support for mental health in the United States, particularly if it has to do with addiction and recovery and things like that. So I would like to see them be more familiar with other models in other countries, that.
Yeah, definitely. There's some really lovely models in America, though, and through Europe and the UK. And, I researched extensively for many years and how it came about, the trajectory that, I wasn't always a trauma therapist or a psychotherapist. It came about from losing my dad to suicide. And that was the catalyst, I suppose, as you mentioned at the beginning about talking about post-traumatic growth. For me, that was a devastating experience. And it was the catalyst that triggered probably all my own traumas, and I had to face that, go through the trauma of losing him the way that we'd lost him, and the fallout and the aftermath, and then deciding to become a psychotherapist and get my own qualifications and turn that experience around into one of service to others, and watching what he went through, the traditional mental health system being misdiagnosed, overuse and prescribing of medication for what I believe was just deep and profound grief while he was going through such a horrible divorce and separation with my mother, who he'd been married to since he was 19. And there was a whole lot of stuff. And I remember talking to his psychiatrist and saying, could he just not be experiencing trauma? Could this, not just be grief? Like, why do we not let men grieve? Why does it have to be that, he's clinically depressed or massive, manic depressive disorder back then, which then got changed to bipolar disorder and all that. And, my dad's psychiatrist said, so well, what trauma? And I'm like, he went through the Second World War. Malta got bombed heavily, loss of country, leaving country, coming to Australia on the boats, like all of that stuff is, a lot that gets held within the somatic memory or the resonance, of the system. And then it just later on in life, another major life transition and event can bring all that stuff up to the surface. And I believe that had a lot to do with it. And then, his declining mental health. And then, he hated the medication. And so I sort of really took stock of what happened to him through that process and then losing him. And then I just thought, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be more healing that can be done in a different way than either community or a psychiatric ward. Yeah, because there's nothing healing on a psychiatric ward. I've walked on the corridors of those wards, and I've worked on those wards, and there's nothing really therapeutic or healing in those environments. And so I've always been focused on that missing middle, that gap in the middle for people, that I always believed if there was a place like Envico, my dad would probably still be alive today.
Right.
There was a place for people to go to where they can just be nurtured, where they can just be supported, where they can allow to feel their range of emotions and be supported by a team of professionals to have as much therapy and intensive support that they require, as well as being still remaining a part of community. Because what happens is when a person goes through, whether it's a mental illness or a hospitalization or something like that, it's like you're removed from community, you're removed from family. And so by putting people in a micro community, that they are still part of the greater community, they can still feel. And if we build enough community bridges and support, then those people can come in as well and support those participants to still remain a part of community, and you can transition them out. Then I feel that a person has a better trajectory for post-traumatic growth, post leaving the residential care, that they will leave with skills, training, possibly job opportunities, better relationships with their families and their self, and that they're actually healing at the root cause instead of just looking at the symptoms of the disorganized system in a way. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I'm glad that you expounded on that, because you're not aware of or people that don't have mental health issues are not aware of the dysfunction and the gaps and the things that are experienced by people, and until it's you that we all have mental health issues at one time or another in our life, some more severe than others. And so it's a lot that you're educating us about right now. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think before talking about what is post-traumatic growth, talk a little bit about just PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and how that manifests in people that you see, but also, you mentioned your father's, grieving and loss over his marriage with your mother, so a lot of it seems to be triggered around loss of love, abandonment, things like that.
It can be
a little bit?
it can be triggered. You mainly see a lot of your, say, PTSD type disorders. If you think about veterans of war and people that have been put through prolonged trauma, so sustaining, prolonged childhood abuse and things like that, or even just emotional neglect and abuse, can be your complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's ongoing. Your PTSD can sometimes be presented in, for example, a sexual assault, a robbery, being held at gunpoint. Sometimes you could have PTSD if it was a major accident, plane crashes, natural disasters, things like that. And so remembering that trauma as well, trauma is not in the event. Trauma is your nervous system and your response to the event. That's why you can have a group of people that could go through exactly the same situation, and they'll all come out with a different perspective or a different, experience from what actually happened. And so PTSD can be presenting with, intrusive memories, the looping, the nightmares, the feeling that you are still stuck back there in whatever that was and haven't been able to move on. You have the flashbacks, a car drives past and it backfires, but it feels to you like it was a gun going off. Yeah. And then you're back there and you're having the flood of memories. Yeah. And so that's when we see that post-traumatic stress. And the disorder part is that the person's nervous system is not regulated. So dis-ease, disorder,
Mm-hmm.
dysregulation. It's
Mm-hmm.
the opposite to order, regulation, and ease.
And so I know everyone doesn't have what would be defined as post-traumatic growth, but how do people that suffer from that, when they get good mental health care, how do they get beyond that?
Yeah, look, and good mental health care can be whatever you feel is right for you. I always encourage people, this is why I always offer a 30-minute discovery session, because it's about making sure that you've got the right fit with the practitioners, interview your practitioners. If you don't feel comfortable with that person, just because a person may have the qualifications does not make them an expert on
Mhm.
you or your experience. Yeah.
Right.
So look at the person, look at their bios, see what experience they've had. If they are a practitioner that discloses their own lived experience, see if
Mhm.
it's a person that you're going to gel with and resonate with. And it depending on what system that you want. I'm more for at trying a naturalistic approach before being medicated, but there is time and place for medication. But I am very pro looking at the new emerging psychedelics again, your psilocybin, your MDMA, and all that type of things that's happening now. I
Yeah.
believe that there is
Yeah.
a lot of room for innovation when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
So whatever works for you, go for it. And when it comes to dealing with your own issues, it's not a quick fix. I always get that comment from people, how long is this going to take? It's like, well, how long's a piece of string? You've been dealing with these issues for the last 40 years. It's not going to be an overnight fix. Like, to do the
Yeah.
deep therapeutic work, sometimes to face our demons, to face those shadows, it does take work. And it's not just about coming and doing the 1 hour of therapy with me a week. It's about doing, the homework, doing the exercises, laying down those new neuro pathways,
Right.
feeling into what is different. And when you do the work, that's where the post-traumatic growth can come from.
Mhm.
um, and there's a lot of people that, you yourself, there's lots of people that have gone through traumatic experiences, turned it around, and now are advocates for others. There's the lived experience, there's the peer-led movement, the consumer movement. You look at the Me Too movement, people that
Mhm.
become vocal and voices for change
Yeah.
based on what it is that they've gone through and experienced. That is a sign of the post-traumatic growth. Even in one of my podcasts, I think it's the podcast where I'm talking with Mark, and it's
And
the
that's in
podcast titled,
your
in my podcast, Transcending
transcending trauma. Yeah.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Transcending Trauma. I'm talking to Mark, Code 9, and we talk about post-traumatic growth. In that, he was a
Mhm.
sergeant in the police force going to a major suicide that was the catalyst that changed his life. And now he's an advocate and talks openly about what it was like to develop PTSD as a police officer and still a working officer. So, growth can come through trauma.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the quotes that I love from Dr. P. Levine, is that, trauma does not have to be a life sentence. It is healable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I've seen that through, my own clients and the people that I get to talk to on my own podcast,
Yeah.
have gone through horrific traumas as children and turned out, to be amazing coaches, and helping
Yeah.
many other people through that. So that is post-traumatic growth.
Well, that's a great explanation of that. When I think about people that I work with, I think about people that have been sleeping in the same bed with someone for 52 years, and now that person isn't in their life anymore.
Yeah,
Their whole identity of who they are and what they are and is just 180 degrees now. And the difficulty that anyone would face, but some more than others, in adjusting to a new reality. They're
exactly.
yeah. And then so there's that aspect, after someone has died. And then there's also people probably more close to the dying person, or maybe the dying person themselves, having anticipatory grief.
Mm.
And I have seen people take that, work through that, maybe in the Kubler-Ross, model of 5 stages of grief rapidly, and get to a place of acceptance where they can really look at the end of their life in a joyful way.
Mm.
But again, it's fascinating to me to see how some people are equipped, supported naturally, or fortunately, that others just don't have those
Mm.
support systems around them, or the resilience within themselves to approach difficulty in a way that's healthy for them and healthy for those around them.
And that's an important point. What you're talking about there is resilience. And that's a lot of the trauma work that I do, is that what we have is what you call the internal resources and then the external resources. So what are the support networks? What are the family networks? And then building the capacity for the internal networks and internal support, resources. How do you take care of yourself? All that self-care. And when you were just talking before, it made me think about my father, that, that was a really good point that you made about, you've shared the same bed, you've been married for the last 40 odd years or 50 years, and then that person is going. And that was a direct question that I asked my father's psychiatrist. This was his hospital appointed psychiatrist. My mother was divorcing him. And I found out one day, because my dad rang me from the psychiatrist appointment, said, can you come to the to the rooms? And I went, okay. So I turn up, and he's still waiting in the waiting room. And I'm like, what are you doing sitting out here? And he's like, oh, your mother's in there. And then, my mother left, and then he said, come in with me. So I went in with him, and I said to the psychiatrist, I said, why is my mother here? And he goes, oh, she's been coming and being in on your father's sessions for the last, more than 12 months. And I'm like, well, are you doing couples therapy? No, she just has her say. And I'm like, this is a person who's divorcing you. I said, so you're his hospital appointed psychiatrist. Where is the doctor-patient confidentiality? And 2, why is she sitting in here on his therapy sessions? And he turned around to my father and he said, Mr. Spiteri, do you not want your wife sitting in on your therapy sessions? And he's like, no. And he went, from that moment forward, she wasn't allowed in on the therapy sessions. And in that moment, I said to him, what are you doing to reframe my father? He's been with this woman since he was 19. They've been married, very traditional marriage. What are you doing to reframe what it's going to be like for him in his 60s and beyond, of life like without her? Like, she washed for him, cooked for him, did all that sort of stuff, that very traditional setup. How are you reframing? And he just sort of looked at me like I had 2 heads. Like, what is happening in these therapy sessions? So, even there are similarities there, that when you're dealing with a loved one, and I didn't get to prepare for my father's death. It was suicide, so bang, it's sudden. But if you are dealing with the loss of a parent or a loved one, or even a sibling, whatever is passing, I think what you're doing is really important. That if you can transition, if you've got a set frame, a time frame, you've got the next 6 months, or you've got the next 12 months, then that is the transition phase that you prepare for that passing.
Mm.
Build up the resources. If you've been with the person for a very long time, start linking into your support groups. Have a look at what's in your immediate community in regards to your family. If you don't have that immediate circle, then look to your outer circle. What community groups do you have? Is there walking?
So important. Yeah.
And then you build those rings
Mm-hmm.
around the person, as well as allowing the grief, allowing that you will miss that person.
Yeah.
And I often see that the dying process can be very much like the birthing process.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just another transition, and it's just that they are leaving in this form, and you'll have the memories and the energy and everything will pass on. But it can be a very beautiful process if you allow it.
Absolutely. But yeah, you're pointing out how important it is to have a team of people in concentric circles around you for support and even backup support. But
Exactly.
the person that I'm thinking about that had just such difficulty losing the spouse, there was a lot of denial about her even being on death's door up until,
Yeah.
And so there wasn't, it was like this person was dying and they weren't even talking about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
And that's the level of denial that you're dealing with. And, and look, you may be dipping into some other deeper marital issues there in regards to, is there some real codependency here? Sometimes people, when they get into relationship, they lose sense of self. Yeah. It all becomes about the other person, and they sort of, or they operate in a relationship.
acquiesce.
Yeah, in a single
Yeah.
person system. Yeah, they don't have that attunement and that connection. And I think communication is a major one, and I think it's a communication that needs to happen within the family as well, and the siblings, and not to deny that this is going to happen and the person is passing, because that person that is passing also needs to be seen and validated
Oh, so much. Oh,
in the
God,
passing.
yes. So true. Yeah,
It's
it's about
like,
them. It
it's
is
about
about
them.
them.
Exactly. It's all about them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, it's natural that people are going to grieve that process. It was the anniversary of my father's 20 years in November last year. And every year that comes around, it's just like the day that it happened. I will always miss him. Yeah. And I'll always love him. But if you have the time to prepare for a person's passing, then you make every day count, and you do what you need to do to build those resources, because when they're gone, you grieve and you will feel that loss, and it's going to hurt. We're not going to deny that. It's going to hurt like hell. And if you have faith, whatever that is, whether it's a spiritual practice, whether it's faith, whether it's you take up a support group, whatever you need to do, you will survive and you will get through it. And it's shitty and painful, but you're alive and you've survived it, and you will get through it. And that's what's so important about programs that you're doing, to educate people.
Well, so many people that I've worked with and know, that those final moments and the are just like a brilliant memory. I mean, it is just like every detail, smells, they can describe it. It's a very, very vivid memory that I think goes with those big landmarks in life, whether it's a wedding or a graduation, but certainly a death, a dying, and everything that's around that is a very vivid memory. And one of the things that we do is try to, even to how the room looks or how the room smells or how the person is laid out at the end, and things that are going to be in your memory forever, trying to make that as positive and sacred and beautiful as possible. So when you talk about the event, decades later, it's still that fresh memory for you of and it's not around the the parts of it that the loss and stuff. Yes, it's there. I mean, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it, but
well, when you're talking about weddings and things like that, it's like, we have an engagement party before the wedding, and I would love to see more people have celebration of life ceremonies before the funeral. Well, do you know what I mean? Why do we have this big engagement party to say that there's a coming of a union, and then we have a wedding? Why do we not have, if a person is passing, have that person present with all their loved ones and their friends, do a slideshow, do whatever, celebrate that person's life, let them be there for the last hurrah, and then know that the next step is the ceremony of the ending and the passing and the saying goodbye. Just even thinking about that brings emotion to my heart, just thinking that why we don't do that more often to celebrate their life and passing while they're there with us. Why are we so afraid of that?
Yeah, well, and I think more and more people are not. I mean, there are some really beautiful examples that I know of where people have had, the tables laid out and they've had their belongings on the table and they've just invited everybody over and they are just like, saying, take what you want, and then explaining the meaning of each one of these things. I mean, there's so many different creative ways that people are themselves becoming empowered and taking the reins of the end of their life in a way that they're getting ahead of their story. They're telling their story to others. And it's beautiful. It's empowering. It's gets that concentric circle of people tighter, working together as a team, because they may have different political point of views or come from different cultures, but they all love this person. And that's
Correct.
one thing that brings them together and really transcends a lot of these ridiculous human divisions that we have in our culture and our lives right now. It can actually bring people together.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of tearing people apart, because people go through all their own grieving process, and it brings up dormant stuff that's within families, and listening to the wishes and the dying wishes of that person that's passing. You see that with organ donations and things like that, where a person's want to donate the organs and then the person's passed, and then there's a big hoo-ha of, oh no, that's not happening, and blah blah blah. So, but that's that person's dying wish. This is what they
Exactly.
wanted. It's not about you once they've gone, and so we're respecting that person once they've passed.
Going back
Well.
to going back to the wedding analogy that we were using, it's
Yeah.
just we were talking about, at a wedding, nobody upstages the bride. It's
That's
all about
right.
the bride. It's all about the bride. You are not going to upstage the bride. And damn it, it's the same thing when someone's dying. You do not upstage the dying person.
Yeah.
It's their voice that needs to be heard. It's their end of life wishes that need to happen. And yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And it's about the immediate family as well.
Oh yeah.
It's about the immediate family that what they want for that person and what that person's, dying wishes were. Yeah, it's not about you. I even remember, planning my own, dad's, funeral and going down to the things that, he liked, and he played the clarinet. So I had, clarinet music playing for when people came in, and, a family friend who was a singer, sang Amazing Grace. And, you can include people, in the ceremony as well. But I'm all for celebrating that person's life while they're still alive as much as you can before they go. Let them be there to hear those well wishes. Let people come together to celebrate that person's life and to thank them and to bid them farewell. I think, we need to see more of that happening before it's all done once they've gone.
Yeah.
I think that would help as well
Yeah.
to be the catalyst for that post-traumatic growth. Because the people come together to support, to see that we're not the only ones that are grieving this, and know that there's that cohesion in that community that has come together to celebrate that person, and there can be healing within that then once the funeral has happened. I think.
And it's true too that you can have post-traumatic growth. You're maybe, had this amazing event happen in your life and that you would perceive as negative, and but something good has come from it. And yet while that's happening, you can still have some depression or anxiety or things that you're living with maybe on a lower level. They can coexist, right?
Absolutely, they can coexist. And that's where resilience comes in. Yeah. So I work a lot with helping people stay within what we call their window of tolerance. You're going to have ups and downs. It's about how do you ride those ups and downs in life, feel those emotions, allow them to pass through you. Don't get stuck in them. Don't get stuck, switched on into that hypervigilance, anxiety, sleeping, stress, and don't then get stuck, switched off into hypo-aroused states, dorsal shutdown, depression, low affect, prolonged period of time, I can't move. when you have good resilience in the nervous system, you can go through those ups and downs. Look, as a trauma therapist, I have a huge support network. I have my peers, I've got my colleagues, I have a professional supervisor, I have my own therapist, I have the most amazing body worker in the world, I have a kinesiologist, I have an osteopath, I have a holistic GP, and I've got a naturopath.
Yeah.
Do you know, so when you're working in the trauma field and being of service to others, I have to be realistic about, I guarantee you that if I am not working on something in my own life, guarantee the universe will present me with a client that will shine a light on it, or a client that will come forward and have my story to tell.
Yeah.
And if I haven't worked on my stuff, then I'm not going to be in service to that person.
Yeah.
Because I have to be regulated. I'm working with the nervous system.
And you have to take responsibility for your own self-care and your well-being. And I meet weekly with a global group of doulas, that we are constantly working together and sharing our experiences. And because there can be a lot of emotional stuff around working with people that are dying. And quite honestly, there's a lot of burnout in the community from doing it. And I think because we meet regularly with each other and talk about this, that it's not just for the purpose of self-care, but there's a lot of natural self-caring in our relationships with each other that really is beneficial for me.
Yeah. And what you would be describing there is vicarious trauma. Yeah. So vicarious trauma is when you're working, say, in a field, and you're exposed to other people's traumas, or you're exposed to other people's dying. Yeah. You get what's called vicarious trauma, because you're sitting there and holding space for them. And without realizing it, you can then be affected by it. So the fact that you've got then a support group, where you can then speak to, this has affected me. I had this family that I'm working with this week, and it's really hit me hard, and process how it is feeling for you. You see that burnout and that vicarious trauma a lot in the social care services as well. If you're working with protective services or child services, you think about the police officers as well that are working in, busting the pedophile rings and working with, seeing sexual abuse images of children constantly, that, and you're even seeing vicarious trauma show up in the legal profession in regards to lawyers and barristers and things like that are looking at photographic evidence. You're looking at these horrific images, which is horror, over prolonged periods of time. That's where vicarious trauma can creep in, and then you've got that burnout, and then also sometimes you can get compassion fatigue. That's another thing. When you're doing the caring professions and in service to others, that's why I have a team of practitioners. I have a team around me just to.
No, I'm listening to you, and I'm like going, okay, I don't have a body worker. I need to get a body worker. I mean, that's just
finding a good body worker is worth their weight in gold. Absolutely. And again, because I work with the body as well. I'm a touch therapist as well, so I have to work on my own body. If I'm doing body work on other people, I need to be regulated in my body. But if you can find a good body worker, that absolutely, it's.
I wish you were here. I wish you were in Bustleton.
We can fly now. There is cheap flights.
Oh yeah, with the bubbles, internal bubble. Honestly, it's just like that is just something that would be so beneficial, I think, to myself and for my husband too. It's just having that kind of physicality about things that are internalized that we live with and function with and don't even realize how it's physically breaking our body down, aging.
Exactly.
It ages you,
Absolutely. It does. It ages you quite rapidly. And that they're all the, later in life when people develop autoimmune disorders, your fibromyalgia and things like that, that is because these things have left bound within the system and in the bones and the body. And then, the body starts to turn on itself. So if you don't learn to say no, the body will say no for you at some point
Absolutely.
in your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of going off down a rabbit hole now. I'm just wondering if there's DNA changes that happen to the body after, prolonged.
I reckon there probably is. Like,
Yeah.
we look at epigenetics. We can go back now through epigenetics and looking at the intergenerational, transgenerational trauma that gets passed down. And I believe they're going back 7 generations. So you think about it, even just with the
Wow.
fact that you were actually an egg inside your mum when your mum was inside your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
So they're already picking up just on those 2 generations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Notwithstanding the generation, the stuff that then gets passed down through the father's lines. And so everything that is happening in utero, and that's what I love about the touch work. And there's a beautiful woman called Dr. Arlene LaPierre, and she does neuroaffective touch work. And, one of my teachers, recently passed, amazing man called Ray Castellino, and, beautiful work in the pre and perinatal birth phases, helping people to heal what happens in utero. Through my own journey and my own training and processes, I've gone back to states where I was in the womb. And feeling what it was like to be a fetus in a freeze state. And so you think about everything that the mother is going through during that period when, you've got a baby. That baby's feeling it. Every thought, every emotion, everything that you're consuming, every toxin, every environmental toxin, that baby is forming within that. And then that's their first experiences, and then before coming into life. So a lot of trauma starts back there, that you don't even realize before we even get into our attachment patterns.
I mean, it used to be a superstitious thing that they would say in the South, in the United States, where I come from. They'd say, "Oh, you're going to mark that baby. You're going to mark that baby," And but it was always considered
True.
a superstition.
Well, the old wives' tale. Some of them are pretty accurate.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. It's just fascinating.
It's true. Yeah. And epigenetics can be a whole other conversation. You think about the I think about my aunts that, my dad's sisters, they are all super jumpy. Yeah, like a plate will go down and there's that startle response. They jump all the time. But you think about when they were little, or even one of my aunties was born through that. So she was a newborn baby. Hitler bombed Malta. I think it was 156 days in a row. You think about the bombings, you think about
Malta,
that. Yeah, in Malta, it was constant. And they had underground tunnels, and they went underground, and there's this whole another world underground in Malta, which is just absolutely fascinating. But you think about that as a child or as a baby when there's bombs. You think about anybody that is born or gone through war. You think about the Middle East.
Oh God.
There's that startle
Yemen.
response.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So, and then if you were a baby and, you're not born yet and your mum is going through war, you as a little one, it seems to be a pretty scary world out there. Every shock, every bomb, every blast, every bullet fired, that baby's taking that on and feeling it on some level.
Yeah.
Before it's even entered into the world that we are living in.
Oh, just more stuff for me to feel guilty about as a mom.
No. Oh,
I'm
God.
not. No, but it's true. And I mean, I agree with you, and I think the same way we talk about, the birth and death experience, the same way we've learned that it's a great idea to dim the lights and have soothing music and for that birthing process. I mean, it's just so important at the end of life to have that same kind of soothing environment. And it really is those portal openings at both ends of life, beginning and end of life. It's a portal opening, and it's just so sacred.
Absolutely. Yeah.
experience it. And that's why I love the work that I do. I just feel
Yeah.
like it keeps me close to the divine. And yes, there are issues of self-care and having good boundaries that are good professionals, in this field have those good boundaries and know to take care of themselves. But I really wanted to just introduce you to my peeps that are on the podcast, because it is so important to realize that when there are transitions in life and your whole world seems like it's turned upside down, that there really is help out there if you need it,
Mhm.
like from people like yourselves. But there are also so many experiences of post-traumatic growth that are
Absolutely.
just part of the human condition, that we all have trauma in our lives, but how we respond to it, and how our system responds to it can make such a difference, not only in your life but in the people that live around you,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
uplift the world. So
Yeah, it's
Moniquea,
wonderful.
you're just the best. Thank you so much for being on this
Thank
podcast. I
you.
am
No,
just
it's
so grateful. And I'll just say it, it's a do-over. We had a technical problem the last time. So she was kind enough with a really busy schedule to do this again. And
yeah, no, it's my pleasure to do it.
if you would just tell again, your podcast is Transcending Trauma. So if you want to know more about trauma, definitely, subscribe to her podcast, like her podcast, comment on her podcast.
Yes.
And for more information, they go to Inveco Health.
So we can go. So my private practice is somaticsynergy.com.au.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to support Enveco, it's Enveco, enveco.org.au. And I will supply you with all the
Okay.
links for your show notes and things like that. So
Yeah, so we will put that in underneath it so people can find you if
yeah.
they need to, and certainly reach out and get help. And I did want to just say there is a Western Australia, there's a hotline that if people that are listening to this are having, really need support with their grief work or any stage where they are dealing with a life-threatening illness, it's sponsored by the Bustleton Hospice here in Bustleton, and it's a 1-800-975-014.
Beautiful. Yeah.
One
Use
eight
those
hundred
support
nine.
services.
Yeah, 1-800-975-014. You don't have to suffer alone.
Alone.
You do
Perfect.
not.
Yeah.
You do
No.
not.
Yeah. And let in that support. Yeah. The
It's very
support's there.
important.
Let it in as much as you can. Yeah. One step at a time.
Moniquea, we'll be
Thank you.
speaking together soon. I know.
We
I
will.
just
Thank
thank you so
you.
very, very much.